My name is Marcus Chen, and I'm about to tell you how one cry in the darkness saved two lives, mine and a baby who was never supposed to exist. The scream cut through the February silence at exactly 3:47 a.m., shattering 20 years of overnight shifts into a million pieces. In that moment, hunched over my lukewarm coffee in the lobby of Manhattan's Meridian Tower, I thought someone was dying. I never imagined someone was being reborn. The sound was coming from the elevator bank, raw, desperate, the kind of cry that reaches into your chest and squeezes until you can't breathe. My flashlight beam found him first, a tiny fist punching at the air, wrapped in what I later learned was a $3,000 cashmere blanket. But it was the envelope pinned to the blanket that made my blood freeze. His name is James. He's worth $100 million. They'll come for him before sunrise. Whatever you do, don't let them take him back to the Ashford family. His life depends on it. A mother who loves him more than her own life. $100 million, sitting there on the cold marble floor of a building I'd been guarding for 7 years, crying like his heart was breaking. Here's what you need to understand about me. I lost my own son 8 years ago. Car accident. My wife Sarah left 6 months later, said she couldn't look at me without seeing Michael's empty car seat. So when I picked up this baby, this perfect, helpless stranger, and he stopped crying the moment he heard my heartbeat, I knew the universe was playing the cruelest joke of all. Or maybe it was giving me one last chance to be the father I failed to be. I should have called the police immediately. I should have followed protocol. Instead, I found myself whispering promises to this child in the empty lobby, telling him I wouldn't let anyone hurt him. Because something about that note, about the desperation in every word, told me that whoever left him here wasn't abandoning him, they were saving him. The Ashford name was familiar, old money, the kind of family that owns senators and judges, that makes problems disappear with phone calls and wire transfers. If they wanted this baby back, and someone was willing to risk everything to keep him away from them, then James wasn't just worth $100 million. He was evidence of something that could destroy them. By 6 a.m., my world had exploded. 3 black SUVs surrounded the building, men in expensive suits with dead eyes asking questions I couldn't answer. A woman claiming to be James's grandmother, weeping crocodile tears while her lawyer waved custody papers that looked fresh from the printer. And through it all, this baby, my baby now, slept peacefully in my arms, trusting me to keep him safe. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. The woman claiming to be his grandmother whispered something as she was leaving, something that made my blood turn to ice water. "You look just like Michael used to. Such a shame what happened to him." She knew my son's name. She knew about the accident, which meant this wasn't random. James wasn't left with just any security guard. He was left with me, specifically. But why? What I discovered over the next 10 chapters of this nightmare changed everything I thought I knew about my son's death, about the Ashford Empire, and about why some secrets are worth killing for. Because James isn't just worth $100 million. He's the key to exposing a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of government, one that my own family died trying to expose. If you've ever wondered whether one person can take on an empire, if you've ever questioned whether love is stronger than money, if you've ever needed proof that sometimes the most broken people are exactly who heaven sends to protect the innocent, then this story will change how you see everything. Hit that like button if you believe that no child should pay for the sins of their family. Subscribe because over the next 10 chapters, you'll watch a washed-up security guard and an abandoned baby bring down the most powerful dynasty in America. And comment below. Tell me, if you found a note that could destroy your life but save a child's, what would you do? because I made my choice and there's no going back. James and I have 8 hours before they realize their first plan failed. 8 hours to disappear into a city that suddenly feels like a hunting ground. 8 hours to figure out why my dead son's name was on this woman's lips, and why saving James might be the only way to finally save myself. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I kept sipping it anyway. Habit. 20 years of night shifts will do that to a man, turn you into a creature of routine, of small comforts that don't really comfort anymore. The Meridian Tower was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of garbage trucks beginning their morning routes. I should have known silence never lasts. The scream shattered my solitude at 3:47 a.m., cutting through the lobby like broken glass. Not a scream of surprise or anger, this was raw desperation, the kind of sound that reaches into your chest and squeezes until you can't breathe. I'd heard that sound before, 8 years ago, when they told me Michael was dead. My flashlight beam trembled as I approached the elevator bank. There, on the cold marble floor, was a bundle wrapped in what looked like expensive fabric. The crying stopped the moment my light hit it, replaced by tiny fists punching at the air. A baby. Couldn't have been more than days old, with impossibly blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. The envelope pinned to the blanket felt heavier than it should have. My hands shook as I read the elegant handwriting. His name is James. He's worth $100 million. They'll come for him before sunrise. Whatever you do, don't let them take him back to the Ashford family. His life depends on it. A mother who loves him more than her own life. $100 million. The number burned in my mind as I lifted this perfect stranger from the floor. The moment James felt my heartbeat against his chest, he stopped crying completely, as if he'd been waiting for me his entire short life. That's when I knew the universe wasn't done torturing me yet. I should have called the police, should have followed protocol. Instead, I found myself making promises to this child in the empty lobby, whispering words I'd never said to Michael before the accident took him away. "I won't let them hurt you," I heard myself saying. "I'll keep you safe." The Ashford name was familiar. Old Manhattan money, the kind that buys senators and judges. If someone was desperate enough to leave their baby with a broken-down security guard rather than take him home, then James wasn't just valuable, he was evidence. As I held him close, studying his perfect features, I couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had been planned. Not by fate, not by chance, but by someone who knew exactly who I was and what I'd lost. Someone who understood that a man with nothing left to lose makes the most dangerous protector of all. The building's silence felt different now, not peaceful, but ominous, like the quiet before a storm that would change everything. Dawn brought them like vultures to carrion. 3 black SUVs materialized outside the Meridian Tower as if summoned by some invisible signal. I watched from the 15th floor, James sleeping peacefully in my makeshift baby carrier, a security jacket wrapped around us both. My radio had been suspiciously quiet since 4 a.m. No check-ins from dispatch, no routine calls. Even the building's emergency systems seemed muted. The men who emerged from those vehicles moved with military precision, their expensive suits unable to hide the predatory grace underneath. But it was the woman who made my blood freeze. 70-something, silver hair pulled back severely, eyes like chips of ice. She moved like she owned the world, probably because she did. They were in the lobby within minutes. I could hear their voices echoing up through the emergency stairwell as I descended, James pressed against my chest. The woman was speaking in that particular tone wealthy people use when addressing servants. Polite, but with steel underneath. "We're here for the child," she told my replacement, a young guy named Tommy who'd never handled anything more serious than a drunk tourist. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. The baby belongs with his family." I wanted to burst through those doors, to demand explanations, to fight. Instead, I held James closer and listened to Tommy stammer through his confusion. He didn't know about the baby. No one had told him. The perfect setup. The woman's lawyer, because of course she had a lawyer, produced custody papers that looked fresh from the printer. Everything legal and proper, except for the timing. How do you get court documents for a baby that was supposedly missing less than 3 hours ago? "Mrs. Ashford," the lawyer was saying, and my heart nearly stopped. Margaret Ashford. I'd seen her face in the business section of newspapers, usually next to stories about another company acquisition or political donation. Old money with new teeth, the kind of woman who could make people disappear with a phone call. Through the stairwell window, I watched her examine something on her phone, probably a photo of James. Her expression shifted from cold efficiency to something that looked almost afraid. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw genuine terror in those ice-chip eyes. That's when I knew James wasn't just worth money. He was a threat to everything the Ashford empire had built. Tommy was explaining about the night shift protocols, how he'd just started his rotation, when Mrs. Ashford's head snapped up toward the emergency exit. Our eyes met through the reinforced glass, and her face went white. Not surprise, recognition. She knew me. Somehow, impossibly, she knew exactly who I was. The emergency exit slammed behind me as I fled down 15 flights of stairs, James bouncing gently against my chest with each step. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but I couldn't stop. Not when I'd seen that look in Margaret Ashford's eyes, the look of someone who'd just seen a ghost walk through their carefully constructed world. I made it to the parking garage before they reached the stairwell. My Honda Civic looked pathetic next to the gleaming luxury cars, but it had something they didn't: keys in my trembling hand. James started crying as I fumbled with the car seat I'd grabbed from the building's lost and found, a remnant from some forgotten visitor's emergency. The engine turned over on the third try. In my rearview mirror, I saw men in suits pouring into the garage, their heads swiveling like hunting dogs following a scent. I pressed the accelerator, tires squealing against concrete as I navigated toward the exit. That's when she appeared. Margaret Ashford stood directly in my path, no fear on her face despite the ton of metal bearing down on her. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering against my ribs. She walked to my driver's side window, motioned for me to roll it down. Every instinct screamed run, but something about her expression made me comply. "Mr. Chen," she said, and my blood turned to ice water. She knew my name. "You look exactly like your son used to. Michael, wasn't it? Such a shame what happened to him." The words hit me like a physical blow. Michael's name in this woman's mouth felt like desecration, like she'd reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. How could she possibly know about Michael, about the accident that destroyed everything? "That wasn't an accident, was it?" I heard myself whisper, the words coming from some deep, wounded place I'd kept locked away for 8 years. Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "James isn't the only one they want to keep quiet. Your family had quite the talent for asking the wrong questions, didn't they? Your wife Sarah figured it out first, before she paused, letting the implications hang in the air like poison. Sarah. My wife who'd left me after Michael's death, who'd blamed me for not being there, for working too many nights, for failing to protect our son. But what if she'd left for a different reason? What if she'd discovered something that made staying dangerous? "Give me the baby, Marcus," Margaret continued, her voice gentle now, almost motherly. "And maybe we can finally let your family rest in peace. Continue this path, and you'll learn exactly how deep the Ashford influence reaches." I looked down at James, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around us. This innocent child, somehow connected to my son's death, to my wife's disappearance, to 8 years of grief I'd carried like shrapnel in my chest. What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about your family's destruction was a lie, carefully constructed by the powerful to hide their sins? I drove until my hands stopped shaking and my vision cleared. James slept through it all, peaceful in his makeshift car seat while my world crumbled around us. Every red light felt like a trap, every police siren a hunting call. Manhattan had become a maze with no safe exits, but I knew one place they might not think to look: the old investigative journalist hangout where Sarah used to take her sources. Mickey's Diner in Queens looked exactly like it had 8 years ago. Cracked vinyl booths, coffee that could strip paint, and the smell of secrets mixed with bacon grease. I chose the corner booth where Sarah used to sit, where she'd spread documents across the sticky table and pieced together stories that powerful people preferred stayed buried. The waitress, Dolores, according to her name tag, approached with the kind of wariness that comes from serving too many desperate people. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." If only she knew. I ordered coffee and asked if she remembered Sarah Chen, a reporter who used to come here. Dolores's expression shifted, recognition mixing with something that looked like fear. "Sarah Chen, yeah, I remember her. Smart girl, asked a lot of questions about the wrong people. Haven't seen her since." She paused, studying my face. "You're Marcus, aren't you? She showed me your picture once. Said if anything happened to her, you might come looking." My chest tightened. "What do you mean, if anything happened?" Dolores glanced around the empty diner, then slid into the booth across from me. She was working on something big before she disappeared. Something about kids going missing, wealthy families covering things up. She left an envelope here, said to give it to you if you ever showed up asking about her. The manila envelope felt heavy in my hands, Sarah's familiar handwriting across the front. For Marcus, the truth about Michael and the others. Inside were photographs, documents, newspaper clippings going back decades. Missing children, all from middle-class families, all investigated by their parents until the parents either died in accidents or simply vanished. Michael's photo was there, along with 17 other children, all boys, all between the ages of 8 to 12, all dead or missing in ways that looked accidental but followed suspicious patterns. And at the center of it all, a charity organization funded by the Ashford Foundation, Safe Harbor Children's Initiative. My hands trembled as I read Sarah's notes, written in her careful reporter's shorthand. The Ashfords aren't just covering up crimes, they're committing them. Michael wasn't random. They target families who get too close to their operations. The children are leverage, then they're eliminated. James is different though. James is evidence. A photograph fell from the envelope. Margaret Ashford at a charity gala, surrounded by smiling politicians and business leaders. In the background, barely visible, was a man I recognized from Michael's Little League team, the coach who'd been so interested in our family, who'd asked so many questions about my work schedule, about Sarah's job. The trap had been set years ago, and we'd walked right into it. The photograph spread across the diner table told a story that made my stomach churn. 17 children over 23 years, all boys, all from families who'd gotten too close to Ashford business dealings. Sarah had documented everything with the methodical precision that made her such a good investigative reporter and such a dangerous enemy to people with secrets. James stirred in his carrier, making small sounds that reminded me of Michael at that age. The resemblance was more than coincidental, I realized. All the boys in Sarah's photos shared certain features: dark hair, intelligent eyes, specific bone structure. The Ashfords weren't just eliminating threats, they were selecting victims based on some twisted criteria. I found Sarah's interview notes with other grieving parents, families who'd lost children in accidents after asking too many questions about Safe Harbor Children's Initiative. The pattern was always the same. Approach families experiencing financial stress, offer help through the charity, slowly gather information about family dynamics, then tragedy strikes. "Mr. Chen?" The voice behind me made every muscle in my body tense. I turned to find a young woman, maybe 25, with Sarah's eyes and my stubborn chin. She slid into the booth beside me, moving with practiced caution. "Who are you?" I whispered, though part of me already knew. "My name is Rebecca Chen," she said, and the world tilted sideways. "I'm your daughter, Sarah's daughter, the one you never knew existed because she had to hide me to keep me alive." The revelation hit like a physical blow. A daughter. Sarah had been pregnant when she left me, and I'd never known. The grief I'd carried for 8 years suddenly doubled, tripled, became an ocean threatening to drown me completely. "Mom told me everything before they killed her," Rebecca continued, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "About Michael, about the Ashfords, about why she had to disappear. She spent 8 years building evidence, staying hidden, protecting me while documenting their crimes. She knew they'd eventually come for both of us." She handed me another envelope, this one thicker than the first. "This is everything she gathered. Names, dates, financial records showing how the Ashfords funnel money through Safe Harbor to identify and target families. James isn't just evidence, he's the smoking gun. His DNA will prove that Margaret Ashford's son Richard is running a child trafficking ring disguised as charity work." I stared at my daughter, trying to process the impossible. Sarah had died protecting secrets that could bring down an empire. And now I was holding those secrets while the empire's soldiers hunted us through the streets. "Why now?" I asked. "Why reveal yourself now?" Rebecca looked at James, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding him. "Because James is my half-brother, and because Margaret Ashford just made her biggest mistake. She let you live long enough to find the truth. How do you rebuild your understanding of love and family when everything you thought you lost was actually hidden to save your life?" The DNA results Rebecca showed me felt like holding lightning in my bare hands. James's paternity test, conducted through Sarah's secret investigation, proved what I'd started to suspect but couldn't bring myself to believe. Richard Ashford, Margaret's golden son and heir to the empire, was James's biological father. But the deeper horror lay in the medical records Rebecca had obtained. James wasn't the product of some affair or secret relationship. He was evidence of systematic abuse within Safe Harbor Children's Initiative. The charity wasn't just covering up crimes, it was facilitating them. Richard Ashford had been using his position to abuse vulnerable children for over a decade. Mom figured it out when she started noticing patterns in the missing children cases, Rebecca explained, her voice tight with controlled rage. They weren't random kidnappings or accidents. The Ashfords were targeting specific families, taking children, and when the abuse produced complications like James, they eliminated everyone involved. I held James closer, this innocent baby who represented the darkest kind of evidence. His mother, whoever she was, had risked everything to get him away from the Ashford family. She'd chosen death over letting them reclaim him, and now I understood why. The diner's bell chimed, and 3 men in dark suits entered. Not the same ones from the tower, but cut from the same cloth. Expensive, professional, deadly. Dolores disappeared into the back room with the speed of someone who'd seen this scene before. "Time to go," Rebecca whispered, already moving. She grabbed half the documents while I gathered James and the rest. We slipped out the kitchen exit as the men approached our abandoned booth, leaving behind only cold coffee and crumpled napkins. My Honda was blocked by a black sedan, but Rebecca led me to a motorcycle hidden behind the dumpster. "Sarah taught me to always have an escape route," she said, handing me a helmet. "Hold James tight." We tore through Queens streets like ghosts fleeing daylight. Behind us, more black cars materialized from side streets, a coordinated hunt that spoke of vast resources and careful planning. The Ashfords had turned half of Manhattan into their personal hunting ground, and we were the prey. Rebecca drove like she'd been running from killers her entire life, which, I realized, she probably had. Every turn was calculated, every route chosen to avoid cameras and checkpoints. Sarah had raised a daughter who could disappear into a city of 8 million people like smoke into wind. "Where are we going?" I shouted over the engine noise. "The one place they'll never look," she called back, "where this whole nightmare started." 20 minutes later, we stood outside a building I'd hoped never to see again. The apartment complex where Michael and I had lived before the accident. The place where my family had been whole before the Ashfords decided we were a threat that needed eliminating. The apartment building looked exactly as I'd left it 8 years ago, down to the broken security camera in the lobby and the stain on the carpet from Mrs. Peterson's ancient coffee spills. But walking through those doors with James in my arms and a daughter I'd never known existed felt like stepping into a nightmare that had been waiting patiently for my return. Rebecca moved through the hallways with familiarity that made my chest ache. "Mom brought me here sometimes when I was little," she explained. "She'd stand outside apartment 4B and cry. I never understood why until she told me about Michael, about you, about the life she'd been forced to leave behind." Apartment 4B, our old home. Sarah had been visiting our ghost life while I'd been drowning in grief, neither of us knowing the other was still fighting the same war. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. We'd both been mourning a family that had been deliberately destroyed, both carrying guilt for sins that weren't ours. The superintendent was the same old man who'd been here when Michael was alive, Mr. Kowalski, who'd always let the kids play in the hallway and pretended not to notice when they drew on the walls with sidewalk chalk. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. "Marcus, Jesus, boy, I thought you were dead. After what happened to little Michael, and then your wife, I figured the grief got you too." "What did you hear about Sarah?" Rebecca asked, stepping forward. Kowalski's eyes widened as he saw her face, the unmistakable resemblance to the woman who'd once lived here. "She came by maybe 6 months after the accident. Looked terrible. Said she was leaving town, that it wasn't safe for her to stay. Left me an envelope, said to give it to Marcus if he ever came back. He disappeared into his apartment and returned with a sealed envelope, aged and yellowed. My hands shook as I opened it. Sarah's handwriting, but shakier than usual, written in obvious distress. Marcus, if you're reading this, then you survived longer than I thought possible. They killed our son, and they're going to keep killing until someone stops them. I'm pregnant with our daughter, and I have to disappear to protect her. The evidence is hidden in Michael's room, behind the loose brick in the wall where he used to hide his treasures. I love you. I never stopped loving you. S. Michael's room. Apartment 4B had been sealed since I'd moved out, Kowalski explained. The landlord couldn't rent it after what had happened, said it felt cursed. But he'd kept my key, hoping someday I'd come back for my things. The door opened with a creak that sounded like Michael's laughter echoing down empty corridors. His room was exactly as we'd left it. Baseball posters, model airplanes, the reading corner where I'd told him bedtime stories about brave knights and distant kingdoms. But behind his bed, where the brick was slightly discolored, my fingers found the loose edge Sarah had written about. Inside the hollow space was a waterproof bag containing flash drives, documents, photographs, and audio recordings. 8 years of evidence that Sarah had been gathering before her death. The scope was staggering. Not just the child abuse and murders, but financial crimes, political corruption, international human trafficking rings, all connected to the Ashford empire. James started crying, as if he could sense the weight of the secrets surrounding us. As I held him, Rebecca played one of the audio recordings. Sarah's voice, talking to someone on the phone just days before she died. "I have everything I need to bring them down," Sarah was saying. "But they know I'm close. If something happens to me, Marcus will have to finish this. He's the only one they won't see coming, because they think grief has made him harmless." The flash drives contained a digital apocalypse. Sarah had documented 23 years of Ashford crimes with the methodical precision of someone who knew she was building a case that would either save hundreds of children or get her killed. Probably both. I sat on Michael's old bed, James sleeping in my lap while Rebecca organized the evidence on her laptop. Financial records showing millions funneled through Safe Harbor to silence families. Audio recordings of Richard Ashford arranging accidents for parents who asked too many questions. Video evidence of abuse that made my stomach churn and my hands shake with rage. But the most damning piece was a confession recording Sarah had made just days before her death. Her voice, tired but determined, explaining how she'd discovered the pattern, how she'd gone underground to protect our unborn daughter, how she'd spent 8 years building an unbreakable case against the Ashford empire. "They made one mistake," Sarah's voice continued from the speakers. "They let Marcus live. They thought grief would destroy him, make him harmless. But they don't understand that a broken man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous enemy they could create. Especially when that man discovers he still has something worth fighting for." Outside, I could hear vehicles approaching. Too many, moving too coordinated to be coincidence. Through Michael's old window, I watched black SUVs surround the building with military precision. Margaret Ashford had found us. "We need to go," Rebecca whispered, but it was too late. The building's power went out, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Professional voices echoed up the stairwell. Not police, not FBI, but private security with unlimited resources and zero legal constraints. I looked at my daughter, this brilliant young woman Sarah had raised in secret, who'd spent her entire life preparing for this moment. "Can you get James out of here?" "Not without you," she said, and I heard Sarah's stubborn determination in her voice. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "Sarah didn't hide you for 25 years so you could die in the same building where your brother was murdered. Take James, take the evidence, and run. Let the world see what the Ashfords really are." Outside, I could hear vehicles approaching. Too many, moving too coordinated to be coincidence. Through Michael's old window, I watched black SUVs surround the building with military precision. Margaret Ashford had found us. "We need to go," Rebecca whispered, but it was too late. The building's power went out, emergency lighting casting everything in hellish red. Professional voices echoed up the stairwell. Not police, not FBI, but private security with unlimited resources and zero legal constraints. I looked at my daughter, this brilliant young woman Sarah had raised in secret, who'd spent her entire life preparing for this moment. "Can you get James out of here?" "Not without you," she said, and I heard Sarah's stubborn determination in her voice. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "Sarah didn't hide you for 25 years so you could die in the same building where your brother was murdered. Take James, take the evidence, and run. Let the world see what the Ashfords really are." The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear doors being kicked in, apartments searched with ruthless efficiency. Soon they'd reach the 4th floor, and this would be over. Rebecca kissed my forehead, tears streaming down her face. "Mom said you'd try to sacrifice yourself. She also said to tell you that heroes don't die for nothing. They live for something. So live, Dad. Live for us." She disappeared through Michael's window onto the fire escape, James secured against her chest and Sarah's evidence in her backpack. I watched them descend into the darkness between buildings, my daughter moving like smoke through shadows, keeping my grandson safe while carrying the weapons that would destroy an empire. The door to 4B exploded inward. Margaret Ashford stepped through first, flanked by 6 men in tactical gear. Her ice-chip eyes surveyed Michael's preserved room with something that might have been satisfaction. "Hello, Marcus," she said. "I believe we have some unfinished business." Margaret Ashford moved through Michael's room like she owned it, her fingers trailing across his baseball trophies and model airplanes with casual cruelty. She knew exactly what she was doing, desecrating the shrine to my dead son while her men searched for evidence that was already disappearing into the New York night with Rebecca. "You know, Marcus, I've been looking forward to this conversation for 8 years, she said, settling into Michael's desk chair like a queen claiming her throne. "Ever since that unfortunate accident with your boy. Though I suppose you know by now it wasn't really an accident, was it?" The rage that had been building in my chest since finding Sarah's evidence threatened to consume me entirely. This woman, sitting in my son's chair, casually discussing his murder like it was a business transaction. But I forced myself to stay calm. Rebecca and James needed time to reach safety. "Why?" I asked, the word coming out like broken glass. "Why, Michael? He was just a child." "Your wife was asking the wrong questions about Safe Harbor, getting too close to Richard's extracurricular activities. We tried subtle warnings, but Sarah was remarkably persistent, so we decided to send a message she couldn't ignore." Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut. The beauty of it was how perfectly it worked. Grief destroyed your marriage, sent you spiraling into isolation, made you completely harmless. Sarah disappeared exactly as we'd planned. We thought the problem was solved. "But you made a mistake," I said, thinking of Rebecca's words, of Sarah's final recording. "You let me live. A mistake we're correcting tonight." Margaret nodded to one of her men, who stepped forward with a syringe. "You're going to overdose on heroin, Marcus. A tragic end for a man who never recovered from losing his family. Very believable, very final." That's when I heard it. Sirens in the distance, growing louder. Not just police, but FBI, news vans, the cavalry Rebecca had summoned with Sarah's evidence. Margaret's expression shifted from satisfaction to concern as the sound grew closer. "What did you do?" she demanded. I smiled for the first time in 8 years. "I raised a daughter who's smarter than both of us. Sarah taught her well. By now, every major news outlet in the country has copies of your son's confession recordings. The FBI has financial records showing your charity as a front for child trafficking. And James, sweet little James with his Ashford DNA, is in protective custody telling the world exactly what your family has been doing to children for decades." The color drained from Margaret's face. Through the window, I could see news trucks arriving, satellite dishes extending toward the sky like hungry fingers. FBI vehicles positioned themselves between the building and Margaret's escape routes. "You've destroyed everything," she whispered. "Good," I said. "That was the plan." Margaret raised her own gun, her hand remarkably steady for a woman watching her empire crumble in real time. "If I'm going down, you're coming with me. For Richard, for my family's honor." "Your family's honor died the first time your son touched a child," I replied. "I'm just here to bury the corpse." The window exploded inward as FBI tactical teams breached from the fire escape. Margaret spun toward the sound, and in that moment of distraction, I dove forward. The gun went off, plaster raining from the ceiling as we crashed into Michael's bookshelf. When the dust settled, Margaret Ashford lay unconscious on my son's floor, surrounded by the children's books he'd loved so much. Justice served in the room where this nightmare had begun. 6 months later, I stood in a courtroom watching Margaret Ashford receive 7 consecutive life sentences for conspiracy, murder, and child trafficking. Her son Richard had died in federal custody. Officially suicide, though the guard stories never quite matched up. Sometimes justice wears a mask and doesn't wait for judges. James sat in Rebecca's arms in the gallery behind me, now a chubby, happy baby who would grow up never knowing the horror he'd been born into. The DNA evidence had been devastating, not just proving Richard's paternity, but connecting him to 17 other victims across 2 decades. Sarah's meticulous investigation had given prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle the entire Ashford empire. The judge's words echoed through the marble courtroom. The crimes documented in this case represent a level of systematic abuse and cover-up that shakes faith in our most trusted institutions. But they also demonstrate that truth, no matter how long buried, will eventually find its way to light. After the sentencing, Rebecca and I walked to the courthouse steps where dozens of reporters waited. She'd become the face of the survivors, the daughter who'd emerged from hiding to finish her mother's work. The media loved the story. The security guard who'd risked everything to protect a baby. The investigative reporter who'd spent 8 years building an unbreakable case from beyond the grave. The daughter who'd brought down an empire. But for me, it wasn't about the headlines or the justice or even the satisfaction of watching Margaret Ashford led away in chains. It was about the moment Rebecca placed James in my arms and called me Grandpa for the first time. Sarah would be proud, I whispered, looking down at this perfect child who'd somehow survived the worst humanity had to offer and emerged as a symbol of hope. James looked up at me with those impossibly blue eyes, and for a moment I could swear I saw Michael's face reflected in his innocent gaze. Rebecca squeezed my shoulder. She is proud, Dad. I can feel her watching over all of us. The reporters were calling my name, wanting statements, wanting to know how it felt to bring down one of America's most powerful families. But I wasn't ready to share this moment with the world. This was private. A broken family finally healing, a father meeting his grandson, a daughter reuniting with a dad she'd thought she'd lost forever. We drove to Woodlawn Cemetery as the sun was setting, carrying flowers Sarah would never see and stories James would never remember telling. Her grave was simple: Sarah Chen, beloved mother and truth seeker. But the impact of her work would ripple through generations. 17 families finally had answers. Hundreds of potential victims would never become statistics. An empire built on the suffering of children had crumbled into dust. I knelt beside her headstone while Rebecca held James, both of us crying tears that were equal parts grief and gratitude. "We did it, Sarah," I whispered. "We kept our promise. James is safe. Rebecca is free, and they can never hurt another family the way they hurt ours." The wind picked up, rustling through the cemetery trees like whispered encouragement. For the first time in 8 years, I felt something I'd thought was lost forever: peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of completion, of a promise kept and justice served. As we walked back to the car, James sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms, I realized that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. We were a family again, scarred, unconventional, forged in trauma, but stronger for having survived it. The Ashford name would become synonymous with evil in textbooks and true crime documentaries. Safe Harbor Children's Initiative had been dissolved, its assets redistributed to legitimate organizations actually helping children. And somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound that had started it all, a baby's cry, not of desperation this time, but of hope. If you've made it this far in our story, you understand that sometimes the most ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things. Marcus Chen was just a security guard until the universe placed a crying baby in his path and asked him to choose between safety and justice. He chose justice, and in saving James, he saved himself. Hit that like button if you believe that love is stronger than money, that truth always finds a way to surface, and that broken people can become the perfect protectors for innocent lives. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this, real stories of ordinary heroes facing impossible odds and choosing to fight anyway. And please, leave a comment below telling us about a time when you had to choose between the easy path and the right path. Because those choices, big and small, are what separate heroes from bystanders. Thank you for joining Marcus, Rebecca, and James on their journey from darkness into light. Sometimes, the most beautiful families are the ones forged in fire and sealed with justice. Remember, you never know when your moment will come to be someone's guardian angel. Make sure you're ready.